So, if you bear with me a moment, we're going to change the presentation here and we will get Wanda started.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Wanda Vollmer, and I'm with the American Red Cross Monterey Bay Area chapter, and I handle the disaster preparedness programs. And since that is the theme of today's discussion, that is something we're going to talk about today. The American Red Cross of Monterey Bay serves all of Monterey and San Benito counties, 465,000 people across 6,100 square miles. The American Red Cross has 3 office locations in the Monterey and San Benito counties, with multiple sites operate classes or area disaster staff and resources. So today we're going to talk about 2 types of preparedness: personal preparedness and organizational preparedness. And basically, in a large disaster, we all know you need to prepare yourself. And not all disasters are going to happen at home in the middle of the night. Let's face it, most of us are at work most of the day, so it's good for us to be personally prepared as well as prepared within our organizations. So let's get into that. Personally prepared, this falls for organizations as well as for personal, as for personal preparedness, 3 steps are get a kit, make a plan, and be informed. And we have a program right now called Be Red Cross Ready, and this emphasizes these 3 actions on how every individual and family. We partner with organizations, churches, schools, and anyone who asks in order to spread this message. So the first step is get a kit. This is pretty standard. A disaster supply kit should include the following. Of course, water, food, flashlights, first aid kit, battery-powered radio, tools, duct tape, and plastic sheeting. So basically, it's recommended that you have at least a 3-day water supply, canned food, as well as a can opener, obviously the flashlight and the first aid kits. You can build a kit either by going to redcross.org, or you can actually make a kit with a duffel bag at home and shop at home, so to speak. So you grab an old duffel bag, you grab some food and some water, and anything you don't have, you can either get at a local Target or dollar store. Other items for your kit would include clothing and bedding, prescription medication, pet supplies, cash and coins, sanitary supplies, important papers, contact information, and a map. So you can definitely find out more information about this at redcross.org for a complete list. And it's also good when you're building a kit for your family to personalize your kit. For example, if you have a daughter that is asthmatic, you may want to throw an extra inhaler in there. If you have a grandmother that needs extra pills, things like that. So those are things to think about. The next step, make a plan, a very important step. So with make a plan, the first thing to do is to talk, plan, learn, tell, practice. So let's talk about those individually. Communication is pretty much what making a plan is all about. Talk with your family about disasters and what can happen about where you live. In our area, for example, what kind of disasters do we have? We have the threat of earthquake, we have the threat of tsunami in some areas, wildfires, flooding, things of that nature. Plan. Develop a communication plan. Choose an out-of-town contact that you can basically call, have a family call in the case of a disaster. And another thing to do is to also look at having 2 ways out of every room and 2 meeting places outside the building. And not only is it important to check with your contact when you're affected by a disaster, it's also important that a member of the family let the contact know that you're safe in the event. If the event is nearby and you are unaffected. There's a lot of planning involved. Next, learn. Learn to turn off the gas in your house, the utilities. Learn how to use your fire extinguisher, to call for emergency help, and what the emergency plans for your workplaces, school, and other places you and your family frequent. Also, it's a good thing to learn alternate routes of transportation and communication. Tell everyone in the household where the emergency supplies kit is stored, where the emergency contact information is kept, and the details of your disaster plan. And most important, always carry a copy of an emergency contact information card. We provide those as well. You can print them out at redcross.org. And most important, practice your plan with your family. Make it a fun event. And the third step for personal preparedness is be informed. Know what disasters can happen in your area. Identify how local authorities will notify you, learn what you can do to prepare, and share what you have learned. There's lots of things you can do. Learning to prepare, for example, you can take CPR classes. You can sign up for those at redcross.org as well. And get to know your local fire department and police chief, all of those people. Who do you call on those times of disaster? Who are you going to call? What is the phone number? So be informed. What radio stations do you use in the event of a disaster? A radio should also be in your disaster kit, so that's something to think about too. So we've talked about personal preparedness. Now let's talk about organizational preparedness. Organizational preparedness encourages nonprofits, businesses, schools, and faith-based organizations to be prepared for disasters by establishing and executing an emergency or life safety plan and a continuity of operations plan. We have a brand new program with the Red Cross called the Ready Rating Program. It is a free service for all businesses, and here's how it works. It's open to any organization, business, school, or nonprofit or faith organization. You sign up for membership online and complete the Ready Rating assessment. When you do this assessment, you'll receive a score that will assist you in developing a plan for your organization. It's an online framework designed to catalyze the emergency planning process for organizations. It's also designed to bring stakeholders to the table and spark conversation. We are available for consultation to offer support, and it's a wonderful program. So again, please contact me if you have any questions. And just to recap on the Ready Rated program, a bonus is, we know it's free, it's web-based, it's self-paced, but you also are able to put the Red Cross Ready Rating Program logo on your website, and it shows all of your customers that you are a Ready Rating business member. So those are the two programs that we have. We had the Be Red Cross Ready program and the Red Cross Ready Rating program. Try saying that really fast. If you have any questions at all about it, there's my phone number, 626-5255, and my email below. And please feel free to contact me, and I can tell you all about these free programs.
Thank you, Wanda. If you have any questions, feel free to use your instant messaging client. You should see it as a little blue box. You can click on it, and then you can send us questions. But in the meantime, we're going to switch over to Mike Mosbach from Property Restoration, and give him a second to load up his presentation here.
And I think that's my cue. So welcome, everybody. I'm glad to be here. Just as a means of introduction, give you a little bit of background about who I am. First of all, I'm not quite as attractive as Wanda, who didn't share her picture, but that's me. I am the general manager with Property Restoration Services. Get rid of that picture for you. The beauty of my background is I have a business degree from the University of Maryland. Go Terps. I'll leave that up there. I have a little bit more than 20 years of experience in the construction industry, and a lot of that, actually more than 12 years of that, has been in insurance restoration work specifically. And in addition to my experience, our firm as well as myself, we carry certifications through the IICRC. And that's meaningful because they set the standards for disaster restoration type work, water, fire, dryouts, things like that. So having an understanding and certification in that is fairly important. A couple things I just want to kind of make clear is that I am not an insurance agent and I'm not an adjuster. There is an important distinction. I certainly can't tell you anything about your rates, whether you're insurable, whether underwriting will or will not give you a policy or for what limits. The presentation that I'm here to give today is just simply meant to offer insights from a property restorer's perspective. and I think you'll find that there's some insight there. As a restorer, I also can't act on behalf of a client with any level of authority. It's just basically being your advocate. The one thing that I will say is that it's important for you to remember whether you're a homeowner or a business owner is placing a claim, you remember that you're in charge. A lot of the time insurance companies may try to influence you that they have the reins, and certainly they have the checkbook, but ultimately, this is your claim and you are in charge. Certainly, it's a cliche to say this, but disasters, of course, strike without warning. They're incredibly devastating, and I can assure you that there are so many different levels of emotion and problems that you go through. The last thing you tend to think about after a disaster is all of the preparation that you should have done. It's just a scrambling mode and trying to take care of business as it comes at you. It's coming so fast. So being prepared is pretty critical. Let's talk about what to do. You've had a disaster. You have some sort of an impact to your business or your residents. What do you basically need to do? The critical element here is to take immediate emergency action. You want to make sure that you protect your property, protect your contents, protect your property, protect your assets. That's also important to the insurance company. Believe me, they don't want to pay one penny more than what is reasonable. So if a delay causes further damage to property or assets, they're not going to be real happy about that. And I can assure you that they do pay attention to those things. So taking immediate action is actually one of the things that is usually written into a policy as your obligation. So most people are somewhat paralyzed by the event when it occurs, and they fail to take that action, which could cost them thousands. The second and more obvious thing to do is to contact your agent. Report that loss at the earliest convenience. It is not essential to talk to the insurance company at 2 o'clock in the morning. My advice, and understand from my perspective as an insurance restoration contractor, is to call your agent. Your agent is your advocate. When you're dealing with an insurance adjuster, you're dealing with a corporation who's looking at the bottom line. When you're dealing with an agent, you're dealing with somebody that has an interest in maintaining you as a client. Customer service is very, very important to them. Not that it's not to the adjuster, but your agent has just a different relationship. So if you can report that claim to your agent, that will be much better for you. They can help you through the process more so. A lot of times when you go straight to the adjusting number, or the 1-800 number, if you will, you may have somebody that is quizzing you about things that you really, you're not in a position to talk about, and could ultimately cost you coverage if you say the wrong thing. So talk to your agent. And then finally, you want to consult a firm who is familiar with insurance restoration. It is important to deal with somebody who's been there and been through these situations, because I can assure you disaster restoration is nothing at all like normal construction. So obviously, there are plenty of great firms in the community to choose from. I don't want to influence your decision on who you might want to call. Sorry. Who clicked all those times? Anyway, so what is the key to achieving the best possible property restoration settlement? The key is, not unlike we just heard from American Red Cross, is to be prepared. I'm sure you're going to hear a little bit of that from our keynote speaker, Mr. Alvarez, here in a few minutes. Being prepared is absolutely critical. In the insurance restoration world, how can you be prepared? First of all, have the proper coverages. I can assure you this is something you want to know about before you have a loss and not after. If you are under covered or lack sufficient lines of coverage, that is something you definitely want to know about ahead of time. You should establish the appropriate limits. Knowing what those limits are can be challenging at times, and you may even need to outsource consult with somebody familiar with construction, building codes, things like that, to advise you on what the appropriate limits are. And deductibles are one of those things that we all balance out, either as homeowners or as business owners, to determine what level of risk we want to take in order to gain the lower premium. But knowing what those are and being prepared for that is important. Certainly, you want to read your policy carefully. Understand what your exclusions are. Understand what your obligations are. Yes, the writing is very fine print. It is very, very boring to read. But I can assure you, you have a tendency to read them far more carefully after you've experienced a disaster. So as boring as it may be, knowing what your obligations are and understanding what your exclusions are is really, really important. If you are a business person who is leasing a property, or you have a home that you lease out as a rental, I would tell you, again, based upon personal experience, that you may not, I've come to learn that you may not be able to require your tenants to carry insurance. Now that's referring to a residential setting. In business you can. But in a residential setting, I don't think you can demand that they carry insurance, but I can tell you that if I was leasing a house, I would not lease it to somebody who did not intend to have renter's insurance. The reason for that primarily is because the tenant can hold up the entire process. They can cause extended loss of use to your property. They can basically put everything on a dead hold if they don't have the proper coverages. I've seen it hundreds of times that the owner of that building is just pretty much out of luck unless they want to absorb the cost that the tenant cannot pay. Document the existing conditions. If you have any special or unique items in your structure, your property, the analogy that I thought of when I was kind of preparing this presentation is if you were a photographer and you have a lot of specialized equipment, whether it's photo development or computers nowadays, of course, different lenses for your cameras, things like that. All of that should be documented. The insurance companies, they want to see as much documentation as possible when you go to collect on those damaged items. Having that documentation, such as what type of lens it is, who the manufacturer is, what the age of it is, what you paid for it, where you got it. Believe it or not, that's extremely important. It will help the process of gaining a settlement and make sure that you receive a fair settlement with your insurance carrier. And then keep all your documentation off-site. I know that's, again, something you're going to hear from Mr. Alvarez, but it does you no good whatsoever to have all this documentation only to lose it in the fire for which it was prepared. So make sure that if you have photographs, if you have video, if you have receipts or other documentation that is critical to a claim, to have it in an off-site location. And that, again, will help you out tremendously. Understanding your coverage. Again, this is all under the heading of being prepared. Understand what your coverages are. Everybody knows dwelling, that's your primary coverage. So when you say I've got $100,000 or $1 million worth of coverage, you're typically dealing with your dwelling coverage. The problem is not everything falls under your dwelling coverage. Dwelling coverage relates to the building itself. It doesn't relate to anything in the building, doesn't relate to other components of the construction, and it also doesn't relate to other structures. If you're dealing with a residential, just a standard home, if you have a granny unit, for example, that's not covered under your primary dwelling. If you have a detached carport, a fence, a gazebo, things like that, those all fall under a heading called other structures or detached structures. Those limits are typically very small, so it's important to understand if you do have other structures on that property to make sure that you have adequate limits should they become completely destroyed. Building ordinance, what we all know is code upgrade. This is one where I see people get into problems more often than not. If you have a building that was built yesterday, you need code upgrade insurance. The codes change repeatedly throughout time. It's amazing how often they will switch. Not completely in terms of all building codes, but as an example, the electrical code changed in 2011, most recently. So, and those impact work that may need to occur. Right now, the city of Monterey, as an example, is going through a stormwater management program, and they are placing new restrictions on people's homes and businesses as they do improvements. An example of that happened a few years back was a need for backflow prevention devices on septic or sewer systems. So if you happen to do any plumbing in your commercial building and it impacted any of the lateral that went out to the main sewer line, that entire area had to be pulled up in order to put in a backflow preventer. That could be thousands of dollars. And if you don't have the adequate limits for code upgrade, that could come directly out of your pocket. So if you have a building that was built in the 1900s and it hasn't been updated and that building burns down, I can guarantee you that you're going to have a substantial amount of money that will be applied to that code upgrade provision. Understand what that policy limit is. Contents and personal property. The general rule of thumb is if you took a building and you turned it upside down, anything that falls out is considered contents. That is a separate and distinct line item, and that's particularly important to us businesses who may lease us a property, because this is our coverage. All of our items are in that building fall under that particular provision. So knowing what those limitations are is important. Loss of use, business interruption, again, another line of coverage. I will tell you, documenting your cash flow, documenting all of your financial records to demonstrate when you have a loss of use or a business interruption, it all goes down to profitability and things of that nature. And that's what the insurance company is looking to pay. They're not going to pay your operating costs unless you actually incur those operating costs. So how are you going to demonstrate your profitability? Well, the insurance company has remarkable ways of recreating that. And of course, if you don't have anything to refute their forensic analysis, the chances are you may not get as good of a settlement as you'd like to receive. So documentation, again, but also understanding how long do you have loss of use? How long do you get business interruption? What are your obligations under that line of insurance? Liability. If you happen to create a disaster in your own unit and you flood it out and you happen to be on the 5th floor of a building and all 5 floors below you flood out, that liability coverage will pay to replace or to repair those units, but there's a limit to that. So where are you located in your property? What are the potentials for liability that may exist? And what are your limitations under that policy? All things that you want to be aware of. And then, of course, we all know earthquake and flood. And those are generally specific lines of insurance. Some of us, I'll tell you straight out, as a risk management decision, we've chosen not to have earthquake insurance based upon the idea that they happen so infrequently and the coverage is so expensive. But that's a calculated risk that we understand we're taking. But again, knowing if you have that line of coverage, what those limitations are. That's particularly important, by the way, the flood, because flood insurance is amazingly limited. A bit more advice relative to first-party coverage versus liability. If you do have a claim, it's important for you to understand that you have that option. If somebody causes damage to your property, or if you're one of those people in the 1st floor and the 5th floor flooded out, if they pay for your repairs, it falls under liability coverage. Now, as a restorer, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to advise keeping the claim under your control, because basically you are in charge, again, of your repairs, your reconstruction. If you use your own policy, and I know people are reluctant to file a claim because it has a history, and that is true. There is a history there, but I will tell you, in my opinion, as a restorer, the benefits far outweigh the fact that you may have a claim. The first one is you have replacement cost value in your claim, whereas if somebody does damages your items, they're only going to pay what's called actual cost value, ACV. They owe, if you have a piece of building material, whether it's a content, a computer that's 10 years old, or whatever it may be, they will pay the depreciated value of that item as opposed to the replacement cost value. So by putting it into your insurance company's hands and placing a first-party claim, it gives you the replacement cost value, and then you can rely upon the insurance company to subrogate on your benefit. And if they recover, that tends to not mark your record nearly as bad as if they don't. So my suggestion again is to file a first-party claim. So when you are dealing with your adjusters, there are times when you feel like you may not be being treated fairly. What do? Number one, remember we talked about this earlier, talk to your agent. He is your advocate. He is the adjusting team and the agents work independently for a very specific and calculated reason, but that doesn't mean that they can't get the phone answered well ahead of anybody else who may be just a client. So talk to your agent first. Save all of your documentation. Doesn't matter how insignificant. Any phone call should be documented. All of your emails, anything relating to the claim, make sure you save. Public adjusters are an avenue that you can take that give you some authority. Public adjuster is basically an adjuster who represents your interest as opposed to the insurance company's interest. And they are, when you hire a public adjuster, it's like an attorney. They get all of the documentation. The appraisal process is one that is basically, in insurance terms, it's the mediation process that's required under most insurance policies. So as you go through the process, that will be the final step on their part before, of course, you have to go to last resort, which is litigation. And when I tell you it's the last resort, trust me, it's the last resort. You want to do everything you can to avoid that, because only the attorneys ever win. So it's unpleasant, but hopefully those things can be resolved. So at any rate, I'll just share a couple of pictures here with you as I kind of wrap up, and let you know that these are the types of scenes that you might encounter if you have a disaster. And again, it's a very sobering experience, to say the least, and it can be very emotional. And having that ounce of preparedness going in is very critical, and I think that you will find well worth the time that you spend in being prepared if you do happen to experience a disaster. So with that, I will wrap up my comments and turn this back over to Mr. Alvarez, and thank you so much for your attention, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. All right. More changing of the presentations. Please bear with us a moment as we do that. Well, we've talked about preparing your people, then preparing your facilities, your places. Let's talk a little bit about the thing that most people in technology worry the most about and do the least about, and that is protecting your PCs, the intellectual property, the data that you've accumulated as part of your day-to-day operations. A couple of statistics before we get into some of the detail. Data increases exponentially every year. Data volume increases about 30% every year. So you think about that. Every 3 years, we're doubling the amount of data that we have. I know generally we're all pack rats anyway, but this takes it to a whole new level. And we're talking about amounts of data, not just in our buildings, but everywhere that we accumulate data. If you think about the financial data you have in your system and the documents that you create, the places that you store data, it's getting to the point where it's very difficult to manage. We're also becoming less tolerant of downtime. There was a time and place years back when you were willing to let the computer system be down for the better part of a day, and everybody would resort to those mystical manual processes, whatever those were. But you could still operate, you could still work. Think about what happens when your email goes down nowadays. Think about what happens when you can't get into your accounting system, when you can't just get into Word or Excel on your PC. Most of us just stop working. There's very little we can do when our systems aren't operational. And as I mentioned earlier, because the volume of data is increasing, the complexity of protecting that data has been increasing. And most of us don't have the IT staffing that we used to have to be able to assign the resources to take care of that. A couple of interesting statistics that follow along those lines is most organizations have multiple types of backup systems. On average, 4 different systems in place in their organization to back up data. And even with those systems in place, most of us do not feel very secure about how our data is backed up. And we have more doubts than we do faith in the type of data that's being backed up and where it's being backed up. So I want to talk a little bit about 2 different concepts. Whenever we talk about disasters, we talk about something, an unexpected event that disrupts our operations significantly. And most people plan for this. Unfortunately, it's the least likely thing to happen. What most people fail to plan for, and what is probably more common in terms of the impact to your business, is business continuity. And what we're talking about here is developing a process to minimize the impact of a disruption to your operations, because this is what you're most concerned about. Yes, floods happen. Yes, hurricanes happen. Fires happen, but they happen pretty infrequently. What happens more typically is you have a PC that no longer functions. You have a server that goes down. You have a power outage, as we recently had on the peninsula, that lasts for hours. What do you do with your staff? What do you do with your people? You need to develop a process to be able to restore those critical assets and get back to normal operation as soon as possible. We're not talking about recovering of IT or information technology resources. We're really talking about getting the folks in your office, in your building, back to work. So there's an interesting matrix that we use when we talk to our clients about risk. And this is what when we talk about business continuity, we have to talk about what's the likelihood of something happening, and if that thing happens, what's the impact on our operations. So we develop a four-part matrix where if the impact is low and the probability is low, like let's take, for example, the bird flu virus. Chances of that happening, pretty low. Impact if it happens, not that significant. Some people stay home, have the sniffles. So we don't plan for that. We ignore it. It's not really a significant part of our operation. But what if you have something where the probability is pretty low, like let's say a fire. But if it does happen, the impact is pretty high. Well, that's when you plan for it. You create a plan that says, if we have a fire, this is what we do. And as Wanda and Mike talked about earlier, part of that planning is what do I do with my people? Part of that planning is what do I do with my buildings? And a big part of that planning is what happens to the data that I have and how do I get that back? What most people fail to plan for, however, is that bottom right-hand box, which is something that has high probability of happening and high impact, yet we don't really pay much attention to it. So for example, what happens if there's a power outage and it lasts for 2 or 3 days? What do I do then? Where do I work? How do I get my people to be productive? And as you can see, power outages and hardware failures are a pretty significant cause of disruptions. Yes, you have floods and hurricanes. You have all sorts of possibilities. In today's world, unfortunately, we can include a significant or a minor but significantly minor portion of disruption caused by terrorist attack that impacts big businesses around the world. But for most of us, the two biggies are power and hardware failures. When we talk about protecting our systems, there's a whole bunch of different ways that can be accomplished. Most people tend to think in terms of a basic backup plan. I have data that I need to protect, so I'm going to back that up to tape, or I'm going to back that up to a USB drive, or sometimes even back it up to a cloud-based solution like perhaps Carbonite or something like that. But rarely do you give much thought to, okay, well, I have my data backed up. What happens when I need to get to that data? What happens when, let's say I have backup tapes stored someplace and the hardware that created those tapes no longer functions? How do I get new hardware to restore that tape? It doesn't do me a whole lot of good to have data on a piece of plastic tape if I can't get to it somehow. So many people now are looking beyond just backup and are looking at business continuity. That is, developing systems that provide a backup that could be instantly turned on in the event of a disaster. So in the event of an interruption of some sort. So if a server goes down and I need to get the data off of that server, I could have a backup server. I could have a virtualized image of that server. I could have any number of different ways that lets me get to that data much quicker than relying on backup tapes or backup method that isn't available to me. And there's the next step, which is how do I make sure that if that improbable but yet inevitable disaster strikes, the building burns down, the earthquake happens, the flood happens, how do I make sure that my data is protected off-site someplace so that if I need to restore my operations, I can do that at some point in the future. And that's where disaster planning comes in as opposed to business continuity. So with business continuity planning, we're taking into account that we're becoming increasingly dependent on the electronic means of doing our jobs. I mean, think about it. If you didn't have your gadgets, if you didn't have your phone, if you didn't have your PC or your laptop, how much work could you get done in any given day? How productive could you be? And then there's an expectation that that device or those devices that we need to work with every day are going to be there every day all the time. And I never will have to worry about them not being there. But when they're not there, I expect that my organization, whether that's my boss or my department or my company, has the ability to get me back to work right away. And when that doesn't happen, I get frustrated, they get frustrated, and there's a lot of shouting and screaming that happens. So let's talk about the planning process and what you need to do in order to develop a viable plan of business continuity and disaster recovery. The first thing is you need to identify what we call the recovery time objective. Quite simply, what we're talking about here is how long am I willing to not be able to work? So think about that for a second. How long am I willing not to be able to work? Well, this is the point in time when you must have your business operational. Let's take a healthcare provider. In today's modern healthcare provider's office, they use electronic medical records, which means they're unable to see patients unless their computers are working. If their computers aren't working, they can't see patients. So what's their tolerance for downtime? What's their RTO? It's pretty low. And in fact, in their case, like in a lot of businesses' cases, their RTO may be dependent upon regulatory requirements. You know, banks can't be down for longer than a specified period of time, or they lose their license to function. So they're required by law, by the FDIC and other organizations, to make sure that their RTO objectives are documented and that they have a plan in place to make sure that they can achieve those. The next thing you have to ask yourself is, okay, when I recover, when I can get back to work, what is the most current data that I need to get back to work? And what I mean by this is, let's say in the case of an outage that destroys your computer system and you have to restore from a backup that you made yesterday. Is that good enough? Let's say you miss all of the business today. And let's go back to the example of the healthcare provider. So they've seen patients all day today. They've taken x-rays. They've entered patient records. For some reason, all that data is wiped out and their oldest backup is now a day old. Is that good enough? Well, again, you can see the asterisk up there. A lot of it is determined by regulatory requirements, but some of it is determined by your tolerance for how you need to operate and how you operate your business. And this is where you assess the cost of downtime versus the cost of your recovery time objective. If I'm down for, let's say, a day, what does that cost my business? Can I see customers? Can I process invoices? Does it impact cash flow? Once you figure out how much money it's going to cost you, then you can figure out, well, in order to achieve whatever my recovery time objective, let's say that you decide I can only be down an hour. So you build a solution that will ensure that that's the case, and it's going to cost X. Well, you compare that to the cost of downtime. Is it greater? Is it less? It determines your decision-making process and the budget that you have to put your plan in place. And until you have this information, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to create a disaster recovery plan because you don't know what it's going to cost. So once you have this information, then you can build your business continuity and disaster recovery plan. Maybe if you're a small business, all you really care about is making sure that your data is backed up and, hey, I can miss a day or two of the Word documents I've created, or maybe I can restore an older Excel spreadsheet. It's not going to kill me. But if I'm a CPA and I'm answerable to my clients, can I really afford to lose a day's worth of information or 2 days worth of information? Maybe not. So your tolerance for cost is going to be higher. And so when you put your plan together, it's going to be realistic and it's going to set the expectations for the organization, the users, but most importantly, the decision makers. Because most decision makers like to put disaster recovery plans in place that don't really take into account realities. They'll say, well, yeah, if we're down for a day or two, that's no big deal. Until they're down for a day or two. Then it becomes a really, really big deal. So when we work with clients, one of the things that we do is we go through this process, this planning process, to identify RTO, to identify RPO, and then build the plan that is within their budget and within their pain tolerance, quite honestly, in terms of how long they're willing to be down and what it's going to take to achieve those objectives. And we'll skip that. So with that, I think we've come to the end of our presentation. And we have a couple of questions that we can answer before we end the webinar. So, Mr. Mosbach, this one's for you. What should you look for when hiring a restoration company?
Okay. Well, usually the one with the yellow and the black logo is the best one to choose. If it has a cross in the center, you're right on track. Probably the best thing to look for is, again, I pointed this out at the beginning of my presentation, is the IICRC certification. Our industry is not regulated for the most part. Some of construction certainly is regulated, asbestos removal and lead and things like that. But when it comes to mold and smoke and water restoration, that's not regulated. So in the absence of regulation, the standard of care is set by the ANSI standard. And IICRC, the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification, sets the ANSI standard for water restoration, mold restoration, as well as fire, smoke, etc. And following those standards, understanding what's necessary to properly remediate a structure, whether it's been impacted by fire, water, mold, is critical. Obviously, this is specialized work, and you tend to pay a premium for specialized work, and you want to have some assurance that when you're paying the premium price, that you're getting the results that you anticipate. If it's a fire job, you don't want to smell smoke, and you want to understand that somebody coming in knows how to mitigate those circumstances. And if you have water damage, you don't want mold growing because somebody didn't understand the processes of drying out a building envelope. So the IICRC certification, if they're not an IICRC certified firm, I'd stay away from them. And of course, what's the reputation within the community? Do they, are they local? Are they involved? Do they care about their community as well as they care about their business? Or, are you dealing with somebody you've never heard of? So most reputable firms will be well known in the community, and someone will know them if you don't know them personally. So that's a fairly detailed answer, but that's how I'd answer it.
That's good. That's a good answer. Wanda, question for you. So in case of a disaster that impacts businesses, what kind of services does the Red Cross provide a commercial enterprise as opposed to a residential person?
Well, good question. As you know, we do respond to residential disasters, but with our Ready Ready program right now, we're actually going into businesses and helping them create a plan to individualize their company and what their needs are based on. So that is something that's new that we're being able to cater for each individual business.
So it's a customized approach to,
Yes.
Okay, very good.
Mhm.
Well, one question that I get asked about business continuity is how virtualization plays a role. And that topic can fill up an entire hour-long webinar in and of itself. So I won't go into too deep into the weeds, but let me just say that in today's world, business continuity, which means the ability of getting your systems back up and running in case of an outage of a primary system, includes a significant component of virtualization, creating a server or workstation in a virtual environment that can be brought up in the place of a system that goes down because it has a hardware failure. That's pretty typical in today's business continuity disaster recovery planning. So if you're interested, you can give us a call. You have our contact information up there, and we'll leave this slide up for a few minutes. But with that, I think we're done. Thank you very much, Wanda.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Pleasure.
And stay tuned for the next in this series where we'll delve into some of these issues in a little bit more detail.